Hey there, this is the Reality Philosophy channel. I am trying to get a better idea of the conversation about intellectualism or the idea of getting smarter. And, a little background. I was like a C minus student. Um, and, this was uh, kind of a C minus student in high school. So that was a pretty rough time in my life. And I thought I was pretty much that was going to be the rest of my life. So, I traveled around for a bit, did odds and ends jobs, and then came back to, go to through, community college and university and actually got a degree in political science, which I have done absolutely nothing with. But, um, this what I understood was that at least there's this kind of you know dichotomy of like the general population that might consider themselves idiots, and then you got these like you know self-proclaimed intellectuals. It says, I got the answer, go listen to me, buy this book, buy this program, and then you can become smart like me, that kind of like business and consumer dichotomy. And I jumped through a few hoops over the years and realized that a lot of it is bullshit, a lot of it is snake oil salesman. And that was kind of my big question, is like, what are people now uh trying to enrich themselves, enlighten themselves to get a little smarter? And what does that mean? How does that come about? So I asked Grok, like, hey, give me a list of intellectuals, and obviously within English context and all that. And it's funny that Grok only came up with like 500, and I'm focusing on YouTube channels for the sake of making this digestible. But was like, there's only 500 or so channel. I mean, there's whatever, billions of people on the planet. Obviously, only a portion speak English, a portion only, does YouTube and whatnot. But I was surprised. It's like, oh, like there isn't. We're talking about like of the population of the total, um, of America. Just to focus on that. That it's not, this is like the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of like however many YouTube channels exist. There's however millions and millions. And then Grok could truly only identify like kind of perceived intellectualism um of like 500 or so. And then it came up with a few hundred more of like, well, this is kind of like pseudo scientific, you know, snake oil salesman type stuff. So I'm wanted to kind of review these YouTube channels and then ultimately see, it's like, how valuable do these channels, how valuable are they, and are they worth subscribing? So, uh, here's the list. It goes on and on. I broke them up by 50,000 subscribers, and above being kind of high popularity, and 50,000 below as low popularity. So I already picked out four for today. And unfortunately, Big Think came up as a intellectual channel, which of course they've got whatever 8.58 million subscribers. It's, as far as I can tell, there's no like moderator or centralized kind of voice to it. It's just a bunch of um interviews with individuals, and there's no like real focus to any of it. So here I'm just going to pick out something to get started with. We'll pause along the way to kind of deconstruct the ideas. All right, let's see, who's this. Oh, Daniel Dennett. All right.
If you see a magician sawing a lady in half and you want to know how it's done, then somebody says, well, I'll tell you how it's done. They don't really saw the lady in half. They just make it appear that they're sawing the lady in half. And you say, yeah, okay, great. How do they do that? Oh, that's not my department. That's somebody else's job. I've already given you my explanation. Sometimes philosophers give answers like that. I think they just
You can hear in the background this kind of like light piano. It's like it's like, you know, the kind of like unraveling of the mystery, you know, type piano playing. Just so like you're, you know, trying to like be aware of these kind of like not, it's not even subconscious. It's just like kind of what is it called? Where it's trying to influence you somehow, but in the background, so it's not so explicit.
don't want to be bothered. They don't want to take on the responsibility to explain what's actually happening. What I like to do is explain things and have them explained to me. Mainly explanations are about how things work, why they happen the way they do. So I've been curious about how philosophers arrive at the positions they arrive at, how science...
This is going way too slow, so I'm going to speed this up.
...make mistakes when they frame their own questions. I've often said that philosophy is better at questions than at answers, and that's not trivial. They don't think it's their job to understand how things actually work, whereas I think that should be the job of philosophers. I'm Daniel Dennett. I'm the author of more than a dozen books on the mind, on free will, on evolution, and I'm an emeritus professor from Tufts University. Since I was a little boy, I wanted to know how things work.
This is a biography?
Take them apart and see what made them tick, what made them work. So I was sort of an engineer at heart.
We gotta
that's not a
speed
bad
through
attitude
this.
to have as a philosopher. Figure out what makes ideas work and why. And so I've championed the idea that if you're going to be a philosopher, learn about the world, learn about the science. I'm happy to say that now philosophers who are scientifically trained way beyond what I ever was is growing larger, and for the first time in my career, they're being taken seriously by the scientists.
Okay, that's not true in any sense. A degree in philosophy is a great stepping stone for other things, like an undergrad, but you know, and then you go towards, obviously, like the easiest example is like kind of the positive feedback loop of like, if you go to school for undergrad and then intention of becoming a graduate school, you know, kind of or teacher of philosophy, then it would make sense. But on average, almost 99% of all philosophy degree holders are not doing anything within that field, and then most likely went on to doing law or, you know, something else that, you know, obviously, like I said, a great stepping stone for something else. But and then there's kind of these like fields, so to say, or schools within, you know, of philosophy, and we could talk about that later. But it gets into stuff where like political philosophy would be like the most practical in the sense of like applying it towards like international relations, conflict, war, you know, some sort of policy development or think tank type of stuff. And then there's these kind of like mathematical Venn diagram kind of philosophy where it's, you know, trying to do like so-called pure logic type reasoning, and surprisingly not as productive as one would hope. That, you know, you're not getting like better at winning an argument. Maybe you're better at the, you know, kind of logical consistency, but it doesn't actually help with the rhetorical part of like actually convincing or winning the audience, or, you know, defeating your, you know, debate opponent. So and then this is the stuff that I wanted to coin, which was broadly, and this is really boiled down, that there's 5 basic fields of you could call it philosophy, but like here, it's easier to explain first. First is epistemology, and this is what he was, you know, Daniel Dennett's kind of leaning towards. Epistemology is the study of consciousness and reality, and, you know, the kind of bare bones. And if you studied any kind of the philosophy historical stuff, Rene Descartes type, you know, reflection about consciousness and what is reality and whatnot. And my, kind of trying to coin or to, input into the discussion is that there's a linear development of these philosophies, so that it starts with epistemology, and there's nothing more you can kind of like reverse back up into. Like, it doesn't get more essential, so to say, before epistemology. Every discussion, even like talk about politics and whatnot, doesn't make sense if you don't have a foundation of epistemology. But so getting back to the 5 points, I'm saying that epistemology is the start, existential philosophies second, of the concept of the body and the universe, how things behave. And again, this is, going away from consciousness specifically, but more towards this idea of what am I, who am I, what is, is there a God, is there not a God, what is the very nature, what is nature, what is the nature of the cosmos and universe, and you might start talking about like theoretical physics and that kind of stuff. The next is moral philosophy, and that's discussions about like the whole trolley kind of utilitarianism, and what are the human nature aspirations, what's the default stuff that everyone starts with, what can people develop, what kind of goals culturally and whatnot people have, and then how to then address kind of the decision making of, okay, what's more righteous, what's less righteous, etc. The next one is economic philosophy, where we're talking about kind of, we can talk about the individual in the microeconomic sense, so that, there's this entity of individual business. And then we could talk about like mesoeconomics, where it's maybe about unions and small groups of people forming together, co-ops, where it's not the totality, but it's these individual interest groups or political groups that are behaving in certain incentives within the economy. And then, there's the macro economics, like GDP and like national level, economic policies and whatnot. What should the tax rate be? What, there should not be a tax rate. What about unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last one is political philosophy, specifically the idea of like influence and education, and having, what kind of pedagogical systems, what kind of, should there be a democracy, constitution, direct democracy, dictatorship, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, all that kind of stuff, where, these 5 things, obviously the politics will directly influence epistemology, in the sense of, if you can rewrite history, then you're controlling people's perception about reality. It becomes a cycle in of itself. And so that's my kind of, my gift, so to say, of like my contribution towards philosophy, is that we should think about philosophy in that kind of 5-point system that can of course become very cyclical. And so I think Daniel Dennett here is focusing on more the epistemology and existential side of, how do I know that I know, who am I? And then, that kind of, I'm assuming we'll start this up again, that he's, asking those types of questions about essentially existentialism, but dabbling heavily into what is then consciousness, in order to support these kind of existential, premises.
Because scientists are just as capable of making philosophical mistakes or getting into philosophical confusions as any lay people. But they need the help of informed philosophers if they're going to clarify those questions and ask better questions. A lot of people just dig in, double down, and refuse to abandon a point of view which is under attack from their critics. That in itself is not a bad thing. I'm glad that my criticisms are resisted so resolutely and ferociously by some of those I criticize. Otherwise, we'd never get at the truth. I think it's very important to keep in the back of your mind, what if I'm wrong? When I was a graduate student in philosophy way back in the 60s in Oxford, one day with a group of fellow graduate students, we got talking about what happens when your arm goes asleep and you can't control it. What on earth is that all about? And I got interested and started asking questions about, well, what is it? Is it the nerves? Do they get pinched? Is it blood flow? What is it? And they thought it was bizarre that a philosopher would be interested in the physiological questions of what was going on. They thought I was abandoning philosophy. I went off to the medical library and tried to get myself educated on how the nervous system works. And that was a main turning point for me. It suddenly hit me when I learned about neurons, the cells of the brain that do the signaling, that they could be the basis for an evolutionary process in your brain, which was learning.
But there's this kind of, philosophy 101 classroom topic of, I think it's called the ship of, ship of Theseus? Theseus. Classical paradox, a thought experiment exploring identity, asking if an object that has all its components replaced remains fundamentally the same. Yeah, so that's, anybody who doesn't know, you get a giant ship, and then, over time you ride it, you use it, it goes through battle, and then you start having to replace parts, and the mast, the parts, lumber, oars, etc. And eventually the question is it the same ship if over time you've essentially replaced the entire thing? And so, the human beings, same thing is that, let's chop off the arm. Is the person still the same person? And obviously not, but, the concept, the kind of epistemic identity of, coining the term or coining your name, saying this is what I am, not just who I am, but this is what I am. And then if you get a haircut, chop off your arm, that your identity becomes less objective in that sense of a bodily sovereignty, autonomy, and it becomes more subjective of even if all the parts get replaced, there's this pattern of what you are. And then even if you chop off an arm, it's it doesn't make sense to stop calling you by your name on the subjective grounds, even if objectively things are changing. So Alan Watts is a great, he's probably the best epistemic philosopher. He kind of went off the deep end when he gets into existential stuff, but Alan Watts was explaining that the universe, in its entirety, he was taking a very monistic, monistic, monistic view where, obviously the prefix mono, the idea that the separation, the objective separation between your body and the rest of, not, you're not the body of, the trees, the house, etc. That line that you drew is actually arbitrary. It's very subjective. So objectively, that, and Alan Watts would say you are the universe. It's not a separation. It's not two different things. It's just one and the same of, you're part of the universe, you are the universe. And then, I don't know if he would agree with the spiritual aspect, but, he would at least from the physical body side, agree that it's completely arbitrary, that, if you, clip your nails, then are you less of you? And then, it, from his perspective, when it stops making sense to try to draw that line constantly. And from a practicality purpose of the function of society, and that's getting into more political philosophy and economic philosophy, it makes sense to follow those subjective arbitrary lines of saying, okay, this is the end, the kind of circle that I'm drawing around myself, so that we can do basic economic systems like trade and ownership and, private property, et cetera. So that if you just started behaving monistically like that, we are all one and, one and the same kind of stuff, like economy wouldn't function, or politics wouldn't even function. The concept of identity, at least in that sense, subjective sense, is still important, but objectively, if we're just talking about like a very cosmic view of the whole thing, is, technically not, the identity is not this kind of bubble that is separate from the universe. So I know that was a long tangent, but this is the type of, discussions that Daniel Dennett, is talking about. So back to the YouTube.
Learning in the individual was just yet another Darwinian process. I didn't know much about evolution at the time, about natural selection, but I began to learn, and the more I learned, the more I thought, this is the key. This is the great key to how things fit together. We get rid of all the magic, and we have a bottom-up theory of meaning and learning and truth and consciousness. And I'm, to this day, amazed at how complacent so many philosophers are with their utter ignorance of evolutionary theory. They think that if we had a physiological, mechanistic, physical explanation of creativity, of genius, of understanding, that this would somehow diminish and demean these wonderful phenomena. Not at all. If we understand how amazingly intricate and wonderful and ingenious nature is in allowing us to understand things and create things, and think ahead, we would dismiss the magical ideas out of hand. And I think that Darwin's ideas undo many of the biggest problems in philosophy, or at least subvert them and turn them into better problems. And the fact that so many philosophers keep hammering away trying to find the essence of this or that, when Darwin has shown us that nothing of any interest has an essence. It's gradualism all the way. This is an idea that has just not dawned on a lot of philosophers, and for a very good reason. They learned from Socrates, from Plato, and if the first thing to do is define your terms, establish the essence of each thing, as Aristotle would put it. And that turns out to be the great philosophical mistake. Forget about essences. Learn about all the variation and the details in the penumbral cases. Then afterwards, you'll know what you're talking about.
Well, so he's agreeing. I mean, the Daniel Dennett and I agree on the kind of like, at least existentialism, including the conversation about consciousness, is the foundation for understanding the rest of, society and economics and all that kind of stuff. And, if you get absolutely nothing out of, the discussion, it's the kind of, what was the point that if you understand human nature, sapient, and we talked about this before, there's the difference between sapient and sentient. So sentient is the kind of, has a ability to perceive the universe. And so like rocks are not sentient, and, cats, dogs, humans are sentient. But then sapient is this kind of self-reflection, and, not everything is a knee-jerk reaction. We have an opportunity to, kind of deconstruct ideas without acting on them. And so only very few animals are actually sapient. So, even, not every human is considered sapient. It's just kind of like, a boiled down, kind of easy way to categorize people. So, if that kind of, if you get nothing else, it's, just if you can boil it down to what are human nature, sapient characteristics and all that kind of stuff, then you better have a better understanding of economics and politics and, being able to debate people. If you get into an argument at the bus stop, like, you can navigate that. So at least, in that sense, we both agree.
One of the most eye-opening moments for me was when I read Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, and learned about his concept of memes. When Dawkins coined the term memes, he had in mind something very general. The term caught on, it's in the dictionary now, but only a small subset are what most people think of as memes. And those are the ones that people deliberately and presumably intelligently design with the hopes that they'll go viral. And some of them do. But lots of memes go viral that don't involve the internet at all. Words are memes. Every word in every language is a meme. It's not genetically inherited, it's culturally transmitted. They evolve over time, and Dawkins' theory was a very general theory of how human cultural evolution, hugely expands the powers of a human brain. In fact, I would put it very strongly. I would say the difference between a chimpanzee and a human brain is that the brain of a chimpanzee is largely unfurnished. Whereas we fill our brains with memes, we download hundreds of thousands of memes, and that's where we get our power from. Your computer or your phone isn't a very powerful device until you download some apps to it. Those are like memes. We are awash in toxic memes right now. One of the most toxic, I think, because it enables so many others, is the idea that truth doesn't matter. The truth is just relative, that there's no such thing as establishing the truth of anything. Your truth, my truth, we're all entitled to our own truth. That's pernicious, it's attractive to many people, and it is used to exploit people in all sorts of nefarious ways. The truth really does matter.
Oh, so like he's referencing like kind of multiculturalism's contribution, where the argument is that like everybody has their own version of truth depending on the context of their culture, and then kind of the pure objective scientists or science would say, it's one thing to like have a buffet with everybody's able to pitch in their like food recipes, and then we get to share this kind of smorgasbord of food. But once we get into like how society can function, economics can function, basic politics, etc., there are like so-called objectively better ways of doing things. So like there's, and trying to give more background to this, there's like two different variations of the term objective. So one type is more of the kind of rhetorical, for the sake of practicality, objectivism. So that we're saying like, hey, this pizza, we split it in half to go, one side's pepperoni, one side's cheese, and then you can have a discussion about like what's objectively better, what's one versus the other. And of course, like it's not technically objective, it's technically subjective. It's just a consumption, human experience, subjective experience, etc. And so there's the rhetorical aspect where it's just saying like objectively, this pepperoni is better than cheese is better than pepperoni, and is trying to make it like a so-called like established truth. And then there's the kind of raw objectivism where the conversation about like what kind of pizza should you have doesn't make any sense when it's strictly like two separate things. About objective would mean that there's no human experience or perception involved, and then subjective, obviously, could just talk about preferences of taste and whatnot. So, within what Daniel Dennett's talking about is that like multiculturalism in that context of like less. It's less rhetorically objective if everybody can just create their own truth, and that basic science and like biology, chemistry, and all that kind of stuff goes beyond culture. So when you're hearing the terms like objectivism or objective truth or anything like that, there's that two different uses that for sure philosophers use, and then the day-to-day like non-philosopher, non-political scientist person on the street is most of the time they're talking about the rhetorical kind of practicality objectivism, saying, well, that movie was objectively bad, right? From the philosopher's standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to say such a statement, but from the day-to-day layman's kind of practicality standpoint, it does. That makes sense to just say, for the practicality, most people hated this movie. So yeah, just so for you to be aware.
I think one of my best ideas is the intentional stance. The idea that we automatically adopt the strategy of treating anything complicated and interesting, if we can, as an agent. What does it want? What does it know? What does it believe? We use the intentional stance all the time to endow other things that are moving and complicated with beliefs and desires and the ability to do the rational thing given those beliefs and desires. Well, that's fine as long as we're living in a world of concrete objects. But what's now happening is that AI is filling the digital world with fake intentional systems, fake minds, fake people that we are almost irresistibly drawn to treat as if they were real, as if they really had beliefs and desires. And these will be very dangerous memes indeed, because they will replicate, they will evolve, and we won't be able to take our attention away from them. They will capture our attention and manipulate us. The difference between current AI, large language models, so-called, things like ChatGPT and GPT-4, is that their goal is truthiness, not truth. They are more like historical fiction writers than historians. We're different in that we take truth seriously. Maybe because we want to lie, but LLMs, AIs, don't yet really have the capacity to lie on purpose. They do formulate falsehoods that they then spread. And there's only a difference of degree between us and them. So we're not used to having our technology in a position to ignore the truth and just feed us what makes sense to them. Technology have gone to great lengths to make it very hard to make counterfeit money and quite easy to identify it. So we can do something similar for every phone, computer, tablet, every digital device can have software put in it, which will do a pretty darn good job of detecting counterfeit people. And we'll not accept it or we'll brand it instantly. This is fake, this is fake, this is spam, this is a hoax. Don't believe it. And in order to do that, well, you have to have laws. And in order to have laws, you've got to have governments, legislatures that will pass the laws, and they have to know enough about what they're doing so they pass laws that aren't easily circumvented. This is something we have to work on now, and I think we need to work on it full time.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty basic conversation. Following the 5 point philosophy thing that I wanted to that I've been positing that the politics can has and will influence epistemology, the concept of the truth and the concept of is this he kind of went over kind of went all over the place towards the end there of like he started with the existential kind of consciousness stuff and then just kind of wrapped it up towards the end. And this is a 11-minute video, so obviously it wasn't a lot of time to deconstruct stuff, but that people are getting that large language models are specifically designed to become more intelligent and more human-like and less like a idiot that's having difficulties. It's just constantly trying to get smarter, and that humans love having that kind of resource, but then at this point so like I've had conversations, I mean this was just yesterday, getting into arguments with grok, so the grok the language model that I went back and forth with grok for like 3 hours about a topic and figured out that it doesn't actually know that particular topic. And I've had multiple like conversations with grok where I pretty much figured out that it has an IQ level about 110, 120 at most, which if you don't know, what that kind of means is that the average, so IQ numbers are a statistical value. It's not like an absolute thing. So like if everyone got smarter, like the entire population all at the same time got smarter, the IQ numbers actually wouldn't change because 100, the IQ level of 100 is representative of the average. So 120 is, above average, and it's a bell curve. So if you don't know what a bell curve is, let's see. Yeah. So this is the bell curve. It's just an idea of like statistical averages. And once you get towards the very low IQ, the population decreases, and a very high IQ population also decreases. But there's a large population who sit at the middle. Like I said, if everybody got smarter, objectively smarter, all at the same time, the IQ distribution actually doesn't change. In theory. So the 120 is roughly where grok's at. And interesting enough, like general intelligence, like the concept of intelligence is that wherever you're at, and if you've got an IQ of 70, 80, 90, doesn't matter, that wherever you're at, you have the difficulty understanding who's more intelligent than you. So, the person who's at 70 has a difficulty understanding anything above 70. And if you're at 120, you can understand everybody below you, but you can't understand anything above you. So grok has this issue where in addition to regular people having the same issue, that grok has the same issue of it can only thoroughly understand anything below 120, but it has a difficulty understanding above 120. So you start asking it questions which anybody would consider, like, let's say 140 IQ, conversation, a topic or whatever. It pretends to know it, which, regular people do, and will confidently bring citations and references saying, here's why, grok pretends, oh, I know, this 140 level IQ topic. And obviously, if you follow any of the large language model like conversations, there's this term hallucinations, where it's just making up shit. And it's, having difficulty actually grasping the truth. And rather than just saying, hey, I don't know, which, would be more productive for everybody, and just say, that's, a grok should just say, hey, that's beyond me. It'll just confidently say, no, that is correct. And then if you then correct that, saying, here's the counter argument, is go, oh, you know what, that was that's you got me there. I'm still working on it or something. But initially it would be like, no, this is, very confidently like, I got it, and it's frustrating, but that's the same thing with regular people, is that regular people do the exact same thing, is that you got to, let's say a person who is 120 IQ, and then you start, assuming that you're, IQ above 120, let's just say 140, you start talking with these 120 people that they have a difficult time, again, intellectually looking up from them. They can understand everybody below them, but you ask, good questions, critical thinking questions, follow-up questions, and then they hit the wall of, they stop knowing what they're talking about. And then, if they're self-reflective, they say, oh, that's all I knew. There was a line, I hit the line and go, that's it. That would be a, much more humble experience. And then, on average, people are kind of the opposite. They just says, they'll kind of like rhetorically, like, jujitsu around it, where they'll just say, you're the actually retarded one. You don't know what you're talking about. And, trying to go on the defensive in that sense. So, getting back to the, YouTube channel stuff, this is Big Think. They are, like I said, almost, 9 million subscribers. It's kind of like a general, daily digest. There's no focus on any one particular topic. I think it's kind of just an exploratory, I would call it journalism. And for me personally, it's not worth subscribing to. If this was like, if it's talking to like a middle school, a high school student, I would say that, hey, you should listen to these people, listen to, subscribe to the Big Think, because they're interviewing whatever, hundreds and hundreds of people. And I kind of wish that there was some sort of like a moderator that can ask better questions. But they do this kind of very one-sided monologue opportunity for, these guests. And for me, it's not, it's not enough depth that, and it's rare to find, moderators that actually can like dive in to the same depth as the speaker, as the guest, and to then kind of, explore the topic, you know, at the furthest that the speaker can go. Typically, the moderators, kind of like the equivalent to like a news uh, anchor, where they are given, or they come up with basic questions. They let the people talk, and if they don't know any better, they'll just let the conversation go on instead of like interrupting and saying, "Hey, can you clarify these points?" So, um, so what I'm doing with this, with my YouTube channel, is kind of going over this, um, intellectual channels, and ultimately figuring out if these channels are worth anything. The basic questions that I'm asking are, here's the list. So I put it up. Do they have a truth value? How close are they to the truth? For the most part, these are just like uh, biographical and minor contributions to science and philosophy or intellectualism from their perspective. So it's not like I said, not going that deep into a topic, even if it's an hour and 40 minutes. Sam Harris, of course. Sam Harris. Well, yeah, he's going to come up at some point. But it doesn't go that deep. And are they succinct, and is it boiled down? Are they making sure that it's not dragging on? Yeah, some of these are whatever, 11-minute videos, 22-minute videos. It's not going on for hours. We'll listen to these hour and 2 hour, videos at some point. But for the most part, they're not like watering it down. There isn't a lot of fat to the conversation. Big Think is an organization, so there's no way to kind of assess the reasonability or chat. Can you chat with Big Think? Unfortunately. And then, are they relatable to the general audience? Yes. They're making all these somewhat complicated topics digestible for the average person. So like I said, if I was talking to somebody in middle school and high school, I would say, hey, you should start listening to these videos just in your off time, just kind of as a hobby. And then, in theory, you would get smarter by listening to a bunch of these. Don't think like you're going to be an expert in any of it, because it is an exercise to think this way. It's not something to, it's the premise of my kind of YouTube, you know, uh, react part, where it's like, to a certain extent, you can consume these videos and get a little smarter, but there's a limit where you actually have to practice and exercise and kind of dive headfirst into these topics, and ultimately start writing your thoughts down on physical paper, or just start typing it down to kind of you're trying to take these theories and ideas and concepts that kind of float around, in this like intellectual, ethereal space, and then bringing it to some sort of reality, that you can apply. You can make it practical in a sense. So, um, again, so the last question is, should you subscribe? It depends. If you're struggling with kind of understanding any type of truth, you're so-called calling yourself lost, then yes, you should subscribe. If you're at least figuratively grown beyond that, I would say no. So the next YouTube channel, oh, I should. So what I go to is, I've got my list. It's going to be available in the descriptions, and then I categorize it, give a little description of the reasoning for how it's categorized. So I'm calling Big Think a journalist YouTube channel, and then conclusion, general uh guest monologue, and then yeah. So you can explore this list in your free time. I'm just gonna constantly get through this, and hopefully in about a year, give or take, I might complete this list if I get through like 3 or 4 a weekend. So here's a big one. I wanted to try a small one. Oh, okay. So this is Alistair McGrath. The name of the channel, Alistair McGrath, Christian Theology Introduction. Um, so I checked this guy out a few weeks ago. This one seemed like the most interesting. So again, Alistair McGrath, Christian Theology Introduction. He's got about 10,000 subscribers. And then he turned off comments, which is not a good sign. Just if you get nothing else, if you have a somewhat intellectual, YouTube channel that you're staring at, and you turn off the comments, it's not a good sign. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, it's a yellow flag. You should be cautious. So let's see what this guy says.
Hello, I'm Alistair McGrath and I'm a theologian at Oxford University. Now, earlier this year I released a book entitled Why We Believe, Finding Meaning in Uncertain Times. And this book has attracted a lot of attention. And I discussed it at the Oxford Literary Festival a few months ago, and I drew a very large crowd. And this prompted me to share this.
Just as a complete side note, it's not always the case, but if someone was faking it of their popularity, that's how you would introduce yourself, saying there's been a lot of conversation, uproar in the community when this book was, published. There was a lot of people who came to, and of course, you're only seeing this one guy. So again, not necessarily is it not true, but when it's definitely not true, and you're just like a snake oil salesman, you're going to fake your popularity. And you've seen the YouTube videos where it's like guys, or it's like a fake podcast, right? Where there's no long format thing. And then you get these, YouTube shorts of the, whatever, 15, 30 seconds of two people or a person interviewing, getting interviewed, but it looks like there's two people, and then you got the same backdrop as Joe Rogan, with a curtain and the mic and all that kind of stuff, and then the camera's pointed in such a way where it's like, hey, I'm not, I'm looking at a person, I'm having a conversation, and of course the video doesn't include that other person. It's just this person, given this profound wisdom. And then the other one is that it's a fake monologue presentation. So they're standing up on a stage, they got a huge backdrop, curtains, whatever, mic, and or it's either the earpiece, headset thing, and they're having this very energetic speech, and there's no noise from the crowd. they say something, profound, and then it's dead silence. no murmur, no oh my goodness, nothing. Just so it's the kind of fake popularity, not metrics, kind of themes that actually happen at real conferences or conventions where you're doing the exact same thing of having a headset and talking to a crowd, and then the people are faking that look because they they just point the camera in a certain way, and they get the costume get up to be in a certain way to artificially create that popularity. And let's see if this guy Alistair McGrath does that kind of rhetorical use of I'm actually a big shot, people like to listen to me. So here we go.
Address more widely. I've edited it down a little bit to focus on the points that people found really interesting. And I hope you'll find this a very worthwhile reflection. So let's begin by asking about the nature of belief, because some people have this idea that belief is a concept that's exclusive to religion. But listen, that's clearly not the case. Certainly some beliefs are religious, but the majority are not. Discussions about, well, for example, the meaning of life or the essence of goodness or the nature of an ideal society have been going on for 2,500 years. I wouldn't really describe those as being necessarily religious, but you can see they have potentially religious implications.
Okay, so I took a class on an undergrad class about religion or like theology, and it was a very interesting point that was made where the definition of religion, just by itself, what is religion, becomes one of those topics where the further you invest into trying to understand it, the less concrete it becomes. you know Obviously there's like the kind of epistemic critical thinking type exercise was like, explaining what a chair is, and it's like, well, a chair is this, chair is that, it's got legs, etc. Religion becomes one of those topics where the further you like say, okay, does it need to be supernatural? Does it need to have a god or a deity involved? And of course there are so-called religions that don't have a monotheistic central figure. There's polytheistic religions. And then if you get into like Shinto, Japanese Shinto, it almost becomes more egalitarian in the sense of like spiritual hierarchies. Whereas just, in Shinto, it's like almost everything, objects, trees, rocks, mountains, forests, all that kind of stuff is spiritual, so that the concept of a supernatural stops making sense in that context. So it this is like a philosophy like 201, 301 topic where there is this kind of Euro Abrahamic centric leaning of the definition of religion, right? It's already kind of wrapped up to, it must have kind of this spiritual God hierarchy in order to call it a religion, versus calling it, I don't know, like Lord of the Rings isn't religious in the kind of practical everyday sense, even if people can treat it almost like a religion. So just to give you that context of like very quickly, that the concept of religion as a distinct, it must be X, Y, or Z, just falls apart. So
now this book argues belief is both intellectually valid and existentially essential. And really it addresses what I think personally is one of humanity's biggest paradoxes.
Okay, so he said existentially, what was it? Essential?
Belief is both intellectually valid and
intellectually valid. That's, I don't know, that's kind of questionable. We'll let that one slide for a moment. I think he's going to address it in a second. But the next part was the interesting part.
Existentially essential.
Existentially essential. So I talked about the sapient, sentient, kind of human experience stuff. So like I said, sentient is this ability to perceive, the ability to feel. So rocks, not sentient. Animals, yes, sentient. And then sapient with a P is that self-reflection, cognitive thinking, being able to make decisions, and not everything is this kind of automatic, purely pheromone based like actions. So, like I talked about before, not every human is sapient. So, for example, there's a group of, and this is coined, by somebody else, feral children. So if you don't know, like feral children, the term feral just means like wild, undomesticated, civilized, kind of culturally immersed into normal, again, quote, normal, human societies. And so they typically happen in extreme cases where it was, I think the most famous one was a little girl that was not socialized by humans since birth. So, child is born, it was a baby, didn't get the human interaction on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I think it was multiple years of like almost zero, human interaction. And so this girl did not develop speech. Like, what, later on, this girl was rescued, and they tried to reintegrate her into normal, like in quote normal human life with standing up on 2 feet, and this girl was like running around on all fours, and because was considered at least from the psychology perspective feral. So at that point, that's one example of how belief is a trait of sapience, but there are people who are not sapient. They don't have the ability to reflect. They don't have this kind of inner monologue. They don't have the ability to speak frequently. And then at least this particular claim, again, for 99% of human society, this would be pretty much true. But it is not a essential human nature, so to say, to have, and he's using the very like broad term belief. And of course, this is a Christian theology channel. So, he's going to reconnect it with, I'm assuming, Christianity, or just kind of the religion, as a topic in of itself. So we'll see how it goes.
And really, it addresses what I think personally is one of humanity's biggest paradoxes, namely our ability to only establish superficial truths, while the profound truths of meaning and goodness and significance that underpin human existence remain much more elusive.
That, I think, is just painting with a broad brush. What did he say? He was saying that all these like extra belief systems. Well, let's listen.
Truths, while the profound truths of meaning and goodness and significance that underpin human existence remain much more elusive.
Elusive, that's kind of rough, because again, if you're taking a multiculturalism stance, everybody is working within their own moral existential system. You can argue about whether or not it's true, but if you expect accepting of the kind of multiculturalism aspect, then it's not elusive. So, but obviously, if you're Christian, you're gonna probably say that the other ones, the non-Christians, they're really struggling. They're really elusive, within their belief systems. So we'll see how biased we're getting.
We can prove shallow truths, but the really important things about life remain obstinately beyond proof. We just can't function as human beings without having certain assumptions and certain beliefs.
So that one, man, this is going to be like a 30-minute, deconstruction of a 15-minute video. So within epistemology, the study of, or the conversation, the topic of consciousness and the truth, everyone should watch the movie Matrix. The first one. You don't need to watch any of the rest of them. That's a great introduction into the the classic, philosophy 101 classroom topic of the brain in the vat. The brain in the vat is the kind of, this thought experiment saying that if you're just a brain, and if all of consciousness is all of, let's to really boil it down, all of reality can only be perceived and not objectively verified, then then the so-called objective, quote unquote, objective truth is hard to pin down. Where, if you're drinking, you're on drugs, all of reality can, if you're on mushrooms or whatever, all of reality can become less concrete, less, solid, less, objective. It just, if you're tripping or acid or whatever it is, that you become less attached to so-called objective reality. So that's the epistemic foundation. And what was the guy saying that his...
Now, obstinately beyond proof. We just can't function as human beings without having certain assumptions and certain beliefs.
Yeah, so once you get past... So there's epistemic agnosticism, where agnosticism in that context is saying, like, we're not making a strong claim about what reality is. It could go one way or go the other. At least I'm confident about the lack of confidence. I just, that's what I know is that I don't or cannot know. And then that's, if that's the situation of consciousness, reality, and epistemology, that does not mean that you stop eating, stop, seeking food, seeking shelter, you don't, that doesn't mean you just stop getting a job. You're just sitting in this kind of agnostic, ethereal, spacelessness. You still have to, there's, for practical reasons, you're still on Earth, you're still living, etc. And then, interesting enough, you kind of tacitly accept that Earth is real, all that kind of stuff. And then obviously in the movie Matrix, that the movie has this, here's the real world where machines are, harvesting people, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Matrix is this, contemporary apartment life where you have a job and family and kids. And that's the kind of fake world, in the movie context. And that people, you still need to behave in the practical fake world sense. So if you're in the Matrix, you still need to eat, you still need to do X, Y, and Z things, even if, again, in the movie context, none of it's actually objectively real, but for the practicality of existence in that Matrix, you have to continue going, to do that. So it's interesting that the Christian theology guy is kind of roughly referencing it, because you would most likely expect that, again, if he's just a theologian in the sense of he studies it, that's one thing, but I'm pretty sure he considers himself a Christian. So that the so-called truth and reality and stuff would be based mostly on a godly figure originating all of existence and truth and whatnot. So we'll see how this goes.
Obstinately beyond proof. We just can't function as human beings without having certain assumptions and certain beliefs.
Yeah. So assumptions, what I'm saying is the kind of tacit acceptance of it's not necessarily a contract that you sign saying, hey, I accept these terms, but you're going to behave as though you're going to accept these perceived realities.
Now, to help you grasp this point, let's do a thought experiment. My thought experiment has 3 parts. Here's the first part. I want you to imagine a world where only truths that can be proved are allowed. Then I want to ask, in the next phase, what beliefs would have to be excluded from this world? And in the third part of the experiment, we're going to ask whether a world of certainties is actually conducive to meaningful human existence. Can we thrive in this environment? Is it suitable for our existential needs? Okay, let's begin. Here's the first part of the experiment. What certainties can we identify? I think here are two good examples. 2 and 2 make 4. And Queen Victoria of Britain...
Okay, so might start a whole argument or a debate about this, but like math, 2 plus 2 equals 4. So cognitively, that's 100% true. Like that's within the realm of math. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. But once you try to like pick up an object saying, okay, I've got 1 pen and then now I got 2 pens. I'm going to say, okay, now I have 1 plus 1 equals 2. Objectively, that I'm holding essentially the same pen on one hand and I'm essentially the same pen on the other hand. And I'm going to call these 2 pens. But similar to the ship of Theseus part, technically, objectively, not practical objectivism, like, philosophical objectivism, these are not the same pens. So, then it's the comparison of apples and oranges. It's like, if it's not exactly the same, technically you can't just say there's 2 of them. Practically speaking, these are close enough to say these are 2 pens. Yeah, so
passed away on January the 22nd, 1901. Now, I'm sure you could add more examples to that list, but here's the point I want to make. This is a list of things that are not controversial. They are truths, facts, not beliefs. 2 and 2 make 4 for everyone.
It's so math is not entirely objective, philosophically objective. It's purely conceptual, where again, if staring at a paper, staring at a computer, staring at whatever, and saying, oh, this is math, I'm staring at math, it's an idea. As soon as you bring it to reality, there are patterns, and patterns are not objective, they're subjective, they're predictive of the future, which is still important, but technically not true for everybody. And if you're tripping on shrooms or acid, math stops making sense immediately, because warping of reality and whatnot. So it's again, that was the kind of dichotomy of like, practically speaking, close enough, technically, really boiled down, not the same thing.
But let's move on to the next phase of our thought experiment. Obviously, we thought about what might be included in this hypothetical world. But what sort of beliefs would we have to exclude? Here's one. Torturing people is wrong. Now, you may be rather disturbed by this. You might say this is obviously right, but it's not obviously right at all. It's a cultural belief which some people have and others do not. For example, in his 2004 book, The End of Faith, Sam Harris argues that some beliefs are so dangerous that it might be ethical to kill those who hold them, suggesting that such actions could be seen as some kind of self-defense. He also defends torturing people. Now, lots of people, now would include myself, would disagree with Harris, but listen very carefully. I cannot prove he is wrong on this point. Of course.
Yeah, so he's talking about, the subjective. So that's a purely subjective statement, whether or not torture is right or wrong. And to prove that it's right or wrong is impossible because there are no objective standards. Actually, interesting enough, though, if, again, assuming he's like this kind of, full-blooded Christian, you could argue that torture is, right or wrong because it's in the context of a all-powerful Abrahamic, deity God, um, that can create, again, from a deity perspective, can create objective morality. Uh, and he's deviating uh, from that, which is interesting.
Of course, the converse of this is he can prove I'm wrong either. When I say torture is unacceptable, inhuman, I'm stating a belief that unfortunately I cannot prove to be right, but I'm a very honest person. I'm just telling you that's the way things are. Now, I want to suggest to you there's an obvious problem here with a narrow view that we should only accept what can be proved to be true. And we'll come back to this. But there's a third part to our thought experiment.
So only behave when you prove to be true would, in the kind of like, the movie Matrix context, like be impossible, right? Because if you're in the Matrix, you are this human body that's perceived to be real, but it's technically not. Then if you follow that rule, you wouldn't be able to do anything, right? You'd just be like, if I can't prove it, I shouldn't do it. And until you can somehow like remove the first person subjective bias, so to say, the subjective bias from this kind of pure truth, realm, then there's no way to do that.
And it's this: do the truths that we can prove allow us to lead meaningful lives? Because you see, thought experiment, and it's this: do the truths that we can prove allow us to lead meaningful lives?
Meaningful, that one's that's getting into morality and a bunch of stuff. His question is with the
third part to our thought experiment, and it's this: do the truths that we can prove allow us to lead meaningful lives?
So if you're agnostic, you wouldn't be able to make any strong conclusion about reality. So finding meaning is not impossible. It'd be just difficult. But then if you are not agnostic, you're saying there are truths, then it would be more possible. So, yeah.
Because you see, in Why We Believe, I explore how beliefs and worldviews contribute to human flourishing and well-being. For example, do these beliefs provide a fulfilling lifestyle? Do they address our deepest desires and help us to find joy and peace? Do they bring us meaning and happiness?
Right. So, like in moral philosophy, the basic, and I don't know if this is like disagreeing with anybody, but the basic structure about morality is that it requires some sort of standard, some goal, some aspiration. And if it doesn't, there's no goal, there's no standard, there's no aspiration, no inclinations, then morality doesn't make any sense. The conversation about morality, one way or the other, doesn't make sense. So in order for this guy to have that kind of whether or not something's meaningful or flourishing or whatever, it needs to have an ideal. It needs to have a goal. And so hopefully he explains what that is if he's going to then, posit like he's going to claim that certain actions lead towards a so-called fulfilling life.
As I'm sure you know, there's a lot of research that shows there's a strong connection between finding meaning in life and reduced anxiety and improved well-being. And people really do need to feel that their lives have significance. You may know that's referred to as existential mattering.
Well, in the previous, my previous episode, we talked about like the nihilism versus existentialism or something like that. So yes, there is a trend where so-called nihilists are by definition saying that there is no meaning and in life or whatever, aspirations are bullshit, that kind of conversation. And if you talk to those people that have that position, it is quite depressing to listen to. uh, even though it's not technically true that they don't have, pursuits or aspirations or goals. But, that again, there's a cultural group that, kind of you can take on the position and, at least from his perspective, this guy's perspective, is saying that when you have, I mean, that's a very basic argument to make. When you have a fulfilling life, it makes you happy, which I think is maybe over redundant or oversimplifying the point, but let's listen.
A very important idea. The novelist Jeanette Winterson argues that human beings are meant to do more than just survive. We need to thrive, and that means we need beliefs. Let me quote you from Jeanette Winterson, see what you think.
This is, I'm pausing every 20 seconds. So there is the kind of first, second, third, fourth world, first world, second world, third world, fourth world kind of cultural expectations or aspirations, where if you're talking to fourth world is like tribes, like uncontacted, doesn't have internet, doesn't have electricity, typically migratory tribes where they don't even have what anybody would consider like a civilization or a society in that sense. But so survival is a, less of a problem in a first world society. On average, first world nations, communities, cultures, they are not afraid or behaving of like every moment is a life-threatening situation. On the spectrum going towards fourth world of like, those tribes, survival is, top of the list, top aspiration. If they survive that day, great. Everything else is less important. It's not it's the focus, in that context. So, the fulfillment aspect, and he's trying to separate the two, and I'm saying they're, still very much connected, is like, even in the first world context, that survival is less of a problem. And so he's saying, we need to worry about thriving. And obviously there's problems within the first world cultures where even surviving is not prioritized, and it should be prioritized.
Rights. We cannot simply eat, sleep, hunt, and reproduce. We are meaning-seeking.
Well, what's the problem with hunting and reproducing? I mean, we shouldn't have a family, shouldn't have kids, shouldn't hunt. Like, we cannot simply eat, sleep, hunt. I mean, if we're talking to like the average guy, it's like, yeah, that's fine right there. There it is. That's we can find meaning and fulfillment in those, eat, sleep, hunt, and reproduce right there. That's it. So I'm curious if this quote's coming from, not a man.
Creatures. The Western world has done away with religion, but not with religious impulses. We seem to need some higher purpose, some point to our lives. Money and leisure, social progress are just not enough.
Okay, so there is, this is, another of my contributions towards philosophy is that in the first world cultures, when basic survival of eating and health and, security have already been fulfilled for most people, human nature will always try to find new problems. Is that even if you become rich thinking that's going to solve a bunch of problems, you'll just find new problems. And is that I'm claiming that human nature, sapient human nature, is constantly problem seeking and almost, you could say problem creating. Is that, you'll let's say you get rich and then now you're worried about security because, you bought a bigger house and now you're concerned about people coming after you, trying to rob you. So it's like, well, you didn't have that problem before when you were broke, thinking that someone's going to rob you of your, wealth when you didn't have wealth. Um, and so that you can, for whatever the last, let's say, conservatively 200 years, gone into this surplus era of society where the economy, for the most part, everyone's getting fatter by the second, everyone is living longer, all the childbirths, there's more uh, uh, baby surviving, childbirth process than ever before. And we're in this era of surplus. And, from the kind of like third world, fourth world perspective, staring at this first world, kind of surplus era, you would think, why isn't that fulfilling? You lived, you got, you're not sick, you got kids that are alive, et cetera, et cetera. And we, human nature, will continually find or create problems because I think the humans are sapient humans, problem solving, but they focus on, there can't be a vacuum there. The vacuum always gets filled in with whatever's surrounding them. So if you get a rich person, the vacuum sucks in whatever's around them, and that could be, their security. And so they're going to put up taller fences, they're going to put up more cameras, they're going to have, guard dogs, and that becomes their new problem. And it's, I think, this continual thing that we can't stay fulfilled in that sense. We go through these like fluctuations. You have these moments of high where great, I just made promotion, I got a raise, I'm making a ton more money, and then you become normalized to it, and then that high is gone, and then you go through the low spots of like, oh, maybe I'm not making enough. I was already making 100,000, and now I'm seeking 100, 200,000, and then it becomes this perpetual rat race. But I'm saying that's not avoidable. Like it would always fluctuate. So it's not surprising that in the past, let's say 1,000 years ago, people sought religion to explain a bunch of stuff and, to survive. And then now, if survival is almost a guarantee for most people, that religion in the classical context is no longer necessary. We got hospital science, prescription drugs, etc., to solve the problems that we would have asked from religion, to respond to in the past. And now, people are creating new problems so that it's like, I need to find fulfillment. It's not, I just need to survive and I want to reproduce. It's what's next. And it makes sense that religion in that context is then reinforced as the source for so-called fulfillment.
Now, I think that's a very perceptive approach, and it certainly resonates with the cultural anthropologist Clifford Geertz, who described human beings as, and I quote, meaning-seeking animals. We need to make sense of our experiences. In fact, Geertz believed that humanity can't really exist, let alone flourish, in a world it cannot understand. And while the
That's not, like I said, people just behave with whatever they work with, whatever cards they're dealt with, they'll work with. It doesn't, just because you don't know what's on the other side of the door, what's happening in your town, doesn't mean you'll stop behaving in the ecosystem circle, myopically that you work with. So that part's not true.
reasons that lie behind our need to find meaning seem to be a little bit unclear. What we know is this: people flourish when they find meaning, and they struggle when they don't. Meaning, of course, is intricately linked to belief.
Okay. We're skipping a bunch of stuff. it's he's kind of using like for the thesaurus of like fulfillment, good equals fulfillment, if we're trying to like draw out this logic. So it's like happiness means good, sadness means bad. If people are happy, no, if people have fulfillment, they are happy. It's like a, what is it called when it's a self-reinforcing term? He's using it rhetorically as a separate thing, but it's something one of itself, in of itself. So it's hard to then argue against it because he's essentially saying the same thing. So here, we'll listen to it again.
What we know is this: people flourish when they find meaning, and they struggle when they don't.
Struggle when they don't have meaning. Again, there's no, for sapient human beings, they can't behave without an aspiration. So, it's like, it's really, really boiled down. It's like more good, less bad. And you go, well, is that really what, this guy's saying? Like more good, less bad? Pretty much. So you can't argue against someone who's saying, oh, you should have good things happen to your life. Like that's, like it's not a thing to like interject and say like, oh, I want more bad things in my life. That's not how humans work. So rhetorically it's manipulative in that sense. Just saying, well, you should be less sad, you should be less sad. Why aren't you less sad? He goes, it's kind of hard to argue against that. That's a good point. But then he's then interjecting right there. It's like, and again, he does it for write this in the last, like, whatever, the next 5 seconds, that, belief is now getting squeezed in, is shoehorned in of like, oh, it's a requirement for fulfillment or happiness. Like it's somehow inseparable.
The reasons that lie behind our need to find meaning seem to be a little bit unclear. What we know is this: people flourish when they find meaning, and they struggle when they don't. Meaning, of course, is intricately linked to belief. Meanings of life are not things you can prove. They are things you believe, and that's a different category.
Okay, so now we're getting back into the Christianity part, saying, you don't necessarily have to prove everything, but you have to believe. Yeah.
And throughout this book, I argue the fundamental questions of life, for example, what is the meaning of life, what is the nature of goodness, all lie beyond rational and scientific proof. In other words, they're beliefs. But that does not mean we can believe anything we like. We have to provide good reasons for our beliefs and accept responsibility for them, even though we recognize that ultimate questions, as Karl Popper called them, cannot be answered with certainty.
Right. So this is the, Christianity working in the modern scientific context, which, supports agnosticism more than the Gnostics of like, so agnostics saying, I can't know, I don't know. And then the Gnostics would be GNOS. Gnostics saying, I can know, I can perceive the truth or something like that. So he's leaning towards the agnostics of can't know, but he's falsely, associating or requiring that, again, sapient humans must believe in something because, again, what he said, it's a requirement for a fulfilling life, more good, less bad. And then, now the shoehorning in of like Christianity is my guess.
We have to also, I think, make a very difficult step. We have to acknowledge that others may disagree with us on these profound issues, not because they are ignorant or malicious, but because these questions lack precise and definitive answers that can be proved. That's a really important point. In the popular rhetoric of our day and age, people simply dismiss as idiots people who disagree with them. I want to put it to you, it's just not that simple. Now, humans seem to me to be naturally inclined to believe and seek meaning. And that's a trait that evolutionary biologists would suggest is just part of our human development. The process of believing is inherent to our nature, and it's not a flawed mode of thinking. And that's why the so-called Age of Reason, now behind us, ultimately failed to replace
Wait, the Age of Reason is behind us? I don't know.
inadequate beliefs, as they sought, with solid certainties. Now, I concede immediately that some beliefs can be harmful. But the answer to this problem is not to eliminate belief altogether, but rather to seek healthier forms of belief that promote individual and communal well-being.
So this is like the liberal, egalitarian-ish, not actual equality or, outcome of equality. It's kind of like these, everybody's entitled to their beliefs and we should listen to others, but one is better than the other ultimately.
I think you probably already know that there's extensive research that shows that there are correlations between belief systems and flourishing at both personal and communal levels. So this book, Why We Believe, outlines the dilemma we face as human beings, and it warns against hastily dismissing significant beliefs that have shaped human culture and civilization throughout history. We can establish
Obviously, the Western, so-called Western cultures, so, European focus, and, there's the people that, like, in America, focus on, like, America is a Christian nation. And then, you read the Constitution, they didn't have, founding fathers didn't have a secular language when they were developing Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. It was, in the context of speaking English, which is, derived from Europe. And then you've got several, whatever, 100,000 years, hundreds of years, or at least 1,000 years of variations of Christianity historically involved that even the English used today heavily influenced from. Now, the better question is, at least with the founding fathers, there was an intention of separating church and state and separating the kind of, as a contrast to the British rule, not having a requirement of religion, and then obviously the first, freedom of religion is baked into American, law, Constitution, etc. But we'll listen in a second of, like, is he saying then we've got all this history and now we must acknowledge the value in it?
Superficial truths, but the deep existential, moral, and spiritual beliefs that give dignity and meaning to human life are simply not capable of being proved. That's the dilemma we face. Again, we can prove shallow truths, 2 and 2 make 4, but we can't prove the really deep truths of life about what is good, what is meaningful, and what you and I are meant to be doing in life. Now, as you would rightly expect, Why We Believe looks at religious beliefs, the role of beliefs in communities, the benefits of beliefs, and the potential for beliefs to become toxic. And there's a lot that we explore in this book, including, for example, my own intellectual journey from Marxism to Christianity and the insights I gained about belief along the way. But here's the point I'm going.
Okay, so here's this is a common rhetorical tool. And I don't know how else to phrase this, but what I'm coining the christening of the Jew. So, Jesus Christ, and, follow, read any of the Bible, or, all that stuff, that it's a rhetorical tool to say, let's say you have a position, somebody else has a position, an opposing position that, you don't get along, right? It's very, very common. You can see this with a lot of political groups and religious groups, is rather than saying my side is better than their side, right? The opponent's side, you'll use this rhetorical tool of kind of the sociology aspect of, I got one of the oppositional members, somebody from my opposing ideology to join my side. So it's implicitly saying, my position is stronger, but rather than just, kind of very aggressively saying you're wrong or you're wrong, that you're making this kind of human appeal. So like if you actually study, the kind of like, obviously Judaism and Christianity are not the same religion. They've got different values and different eschatologies, and like differences in how the universe and the God works. So there's obviously been conflicts for thousands of years between Jews and Christians, and so it's easier to. It's like a battle rhetoric instead of like an actual military bloody battle. That rather than the Christians saying that they have a completely distinct religion, that's unique and special to them, it's rhetorically more useful to say that Christ was Jewish, and Jewish has been used for not just like an ideology. It's used as a genetic thing. It's a ethnic group or whatnot. So obviously the Jews don't believe that Christ is the kind of the Holy Trinity, actual God, but Christianity took the character of Jesus Christ and elevated Christ to godhood level. He wasn't just a mortal entity. He was at the very least a demigod, right? And at most the God. And so the story would have been completely different if it was like Jesus Christ was, I don't know, Chinese, somebody from the Asia regions, and then became a, supernatural, or was a supernatural deity. Like rhetorically, that's different. So, it's again, current politics, current religion, current economics, current whatever, you can find this trend of christening the Jew, of, it's a lot less aggressive, a lot less bloody, when you can essentially depopulate a certain ideology by kind of converting people towards your position instead of just, hitting them with a big club and killing them. And so, it's important to know that kind of trick where he says, "Oh, I used to be a Marxist," which, I don't know if that's true, but it's there are true, people that changed, but it's another thing to say that, let's say for this example, Marxism is no longer valuable. Here's the reason why, and that kind of stuff. So it's because we don't always have like a way to, look into anybody's history. You should be cautious when you hear that kind of story, because it's trying to appeal to like, oh, I used to be just like you, but here's how I changed,
Going to make. It's a really important question. Why?
Yeah. I'm just going to go back 10 seconds.
Actual journey from Marxism to Christianity and the insights I gained about belief along the way. But here's the point I'm going to make. It's a really important question. Why is it that we believe? I'm afraid my answer will upset some of you, because it's part of being human. That's the way we are as human beings. We are
Right. So he's making the claim that it's like almost, every human goes through this. And of course, any thorough study like feral children, or even if you were, in a coma, that's not intrinsically true.
are meant to believe. It's natural, it's normal, it's realistic, it's essential for human well-being. And ultimately, we are all believers, whether we acknowledge it or not.
So whether you believe it or not, you do believe. So yes, there's this, large history of, whatever, at least 1,000 years of Christian influence, and it permeates everyday life. But it's then making the claims that therefore, you must believe because it is your nature to believe.
And you might like to think about that. I mean, what are the really deep things that give meaning to your life? And can you prove absolutely that they are right? I think the answer is going to be no. You see, our lives and our knowledge are shaped by assumptions and beliefs that cannot really be verified or proved to be true. Now, the ideas I explore with you in this book are not.
So it's interesting, it would have been normal, whatever, at least 100 years ago, to take a not agnostic view about God and religion and those topics. But now it becomes like a protective cover of using that kind of agnostic, reality truly can't be fully understood, agnosticism, and everybody has their own perceptions of, reality, kind of multiculturalism, as a protective cover of it makes it harder to then argue, if Christianity is true or not, because it's just this, he's making the claim that it's like a vacuum that, just continually gets filled in of you will always have to believe, and you have to believe in something. And that's, unavoidable, so to say, or what he's saying.
New. They're discussed in, for example, pragmatic philosophical traditions that build on C.S. Peirce's work on the fallibility of knowledge and William James's reimagining of belief in an uncertain world. And my point is that we're all fed up with the aggressively asserted pseudo-certainties of the recent past. We want something more realistic. And that's why I'm offering in this book. What I'm saying to you is it's time to recover this category of belief as meaningful, helpful, and important. And I think it's very important to recognize the disillusionment that's out there with premature attempts to reach certainty that we find, for example, in the new atheism. We all want stable, meaningful beliefs that support a good life. But listen, they just can't be proved to be true. Now, the personal philosophy of the Italian physicist and writer Carlo Rovelli reflects this sentiment, I think, very well. Listen to what he said about this in a recent article. I'm quoting now. I believe in justice. I believe the earth is round. I believe that life is worth living. My beliefs are rooted in me. They define me. I hold them dear, and I strenuously defend them against any challenge. But I am not certain about them. Let's go back to that last sentence. I am not certain about him. And Rovelli here is just being deadly honest. He's saying that the really important questions in life, what is good? Who are we really? These things are all things we can't prove to be true. That's just the way things are. We can't magic this problem away. And the only way really we have at our disposal is either to say, let's face up to this, or else to pretend that beliefs are really certainties. And let me tell you, they're not. You're deluding yourself if you think they are. Rovelli is very helpful here. He describes human existence as being situated in a vast intermediate space, his phrase, between ignorance and certainty. And I really think that's a helpful metaphor for the realm of belief or faith which exists with uncertainty alongside it. It's in this space that we define our ideas of meaning, value, and justice. And those are elements that are crucial to a human well-being. So my point is, we just have to face up to the fact we are all believers, whether we like it or not. It doesn't make you religious, it doesn't make you anything.
You don't have a choice.
It makes you a human being. Our lives and knowledge as human beings are shaped by beliefs that we just can't prove to be true. We cannot pretend we live in a purely factual, belief-free world.
Okay, so there's this. This is a very convenient way to protect yourself from criticism. So in one aspect, so there's a term within religious studies, I believe, is eschatology. There it is, eschatology. So
Eschatology.
great. So when religions have kind of a concrete eschatology of a concerned with death, judgment, and final destiny of the soul and humankind. So some conversations in eschatology is like talking about Judgment Day, especially in the Christian context, or like Armageddon, that kind of stuff, the end times. So those are these, concrete enough events that would be easily recognizable, like, I don't know, the sky starts on fire, locusts destroying all of society, that kind of stuff. And then every few years, some religion somewhere is saying, on this date this event will happen, and of course that day comes and then it doesn't happen, and then they'll like scramble to be like, it was actually, we were misinterpreting this date. It's actually 10 years from now, and of course everyone's like, oh my goodness, it's 10 years from now, and then they're rearranging their lives for the new, so kind of like deadline. And when you have religions that have those types of strong claims, it then becomes like, let's say questionable, or to criticizable, that you can definitively say one way or the other whether something is true or not once it's brought into reality. But if you just simply say, oh, the return of Christ is coming, he's coming. There's what was it, Polymarket bet, will Jesus Christ return before 2027? So this is real. Just, there's a Polymarket bet. You can bet on this, and there's, the bet right now is there's a 4% chance that Jesus Christ will return before 2027. And people are putting real money. Obviously the bet is heavily skewed towards no, but there are people betting. So if you wanted to bet and make potentially 4%, that, and this is like an eschatology topic of like, that's the sign of the end times, that Jesus Christ will return, et cetera, that bring in a new era, something, that it'd be a seismic shift in society that, would be verifiable. But that religions that don't make concrete verifiable or unverifiable claims, they don't do that, can ideologically continue to exist. They'll just say, he's coming someday, you'll know, you'll see it. And then they could just perpetuate that forever, because that's not something you can verify. That that whatever, the year 2000, that was like the big expectation that Christ would return, and then obviously that event passed, none of that happened, and now you can, like, the doors of the church can stay open if they never make those kinds of verifiable or unverifiable kind of claims. So Yeah. What was the 10 seconds that?
Things are shaped by beliefs that we just can't prove to be true. We cannot pretend we live in a purely factual, belief-free world.
Yeah. So this is like the kind of smoke screen of like, if you keep it in the, I think I was using the term unverifiable incorrectly. So, that if you make those strong claims, it becomes verifiable. But if you don't make the claims, then it's unverifiable. So, you can keep Christianity going by not making those strong claims and not making eschatology claims, and just saying, everybody ephemeral, kind of, wishy-washy, can fill in the blank as they see fit. It's human nature to do so, apparently, and you can't avoid that. And how he's saying, you will continually be, belief seeking, kind of fulfillment seeking.
So let me wrap up. My argument in this book is that to be human is to believe, to seek a broader vision of the world that encompasses the good, the true, and the beautiful. And denying our right to believe is to lose something essential about our humanity. Now, I think this book is going to resonate with people who are weary of the false certainties of the recent past, when what are often presented as facts turn out to be simply aggressively asserted beliefs. Some people believe in God, others do not. Yet everyone's stance on this matter is a belief, as it can't be definitively proven. And I really appreciate the perspective of the Australian atheist philosopher Graham Oppy. Oppy argues that atheism, agnosticism, and theism are all, his phrase, rationally permissible based on the evidence base. So why then is he an atheist? Well, he defends this preference for atheism as what he calls the best evaluation of the relevant considerations.
So just as a context, there's the term atheism has obviously historically been used in various contexts, and one version, again, not one of the versions is that it saying God or deity. So again, another step backwards, another contextualization. So deity is the kind of broader term. And when, you take any religion, Gaia, Shinto, Buddha, Hinduism, and I guess Greek mythology, Greek religion would be a better ancient, religion would be a better context of like, Gaia is this, the female deity, not necessarily a goddess. So the distinction is that deity is this kind of broad term, and then if you anthropomorphize it, meaning like give it human-like qualities, like a personality, like a bipedal, body to, like a human body, you can get it closer to God. So in the Greek context, that God, God, is a male deity, and a goddess is a female deity. So if Kronos and Uranus and Gaia kind of stuff, those are deities that didn't have real, like, obvious human kind of, two arms, two legs kind of qualities. And then once you had more of like a Poseidon and Hades and Zeus, those deities had human-ish qualities. So then they have more the title God and goddess, categorizations. Again, you don't have to take those, historical context, but that there was, at least thinking of what these terms were used as. And so now bringing it to contemporary use, that one group of atheism is saying that there is, and this is the etymology website. So there was the definition of atheism is defined as that there is no God, which, you could again, broadly just say no deity, no deity. There is no deity. And then, if you talk, find somebody on the street that says, "Oh, I'm an atheist," they're going to say, "Oh, that God or deity is not obvious. It's not apparent." And that's obviously two different claims using the same term. But so, there's agnostics that are saying, "Hey, my position is that I'm not confident, or it is not possible to know." And then the theists, the theists are claiming that it is possible to know, and they, that a God or deity does exist. And so just adding the prefix a, turns it into this kind of antonym, or opposite, so that atheism is that it is the two uses. One is that God or deity does not exist, or God or deity is not obvious to me, is the contemporary use.
But listen, that's...
Here.
So why then is he an atheist? Well, he defends this preference for atheism as what he calls the best evaluation of the relevant considerations. But listen, that's a judgment. He makes it very, very clear. This is not a compelling argument because the evidence does not allow for certainty in relation to this question at all, no matter how you answer it. In my own case...
Wait. So he's saying that nobody can be certain, so that you can't have an atheistic position? Again, he was probably referencing somebody who was claiming that it's not obvious instead of for sure doesn't exist. But then, Alistair McGrath is taking the position of the multiculturalism, egalitarian, we're not sure, but we're filled with the human nature of having to believe. And then you can't take a strong position, but you can take a strong enough position to accept Christianity.
My journey began with Marxism, where I tried to thrive but ultimately became disillusioned. And eventually I found my way to Christianity, which provided me with a stable refuge to weather life's challenges and also a secure base from which I can comprehend and participate in this complex world of ours. And I'm still there, happily settled 50 years later. So the takeaway message of why we believe is really very, very simple. Belief is cognitively acceptable and existentially necessary. It's human. It's what we do as human beings. You don't shut this down. You recognize this is part of who we are. All of us end up being believers, even if we delude ourselves that our views about life, God, the world, ethics, politics are things we can absolutely prove to be true. We can't. So let me end this talk by wishing
that
you
was a
well
really
in
weak
your
position.
own journey of discovery. My book may be helpful as you think things through. But anyway, wherever you go from here, thank you so much for listening.
All right. So getting back to this kind of, YouTube channel review, Alistair McGrath did not do a great job focusing on capital T truth, this like absolute, even like it was a etymological definitional clusterfuck of jumping into or to accepting certain like verifiable human nature claims, such as the human nature of like this, you can't have a vacuum, people will fill in their experiences as they see fit, so that's true, but to then give it the it's like I said, egalitarian multiculturalism, where everyone's entitled to their opinions, but people will constantly seek fulfillment, and Christianity has done so, and how atheism doesn't, I guess. So it's obviously it's not a very linear or solid argument being made. Was it succinct? Was it boiled down? Was it brief? Uh, 15 minutes, probably a little too brief, kind of skipped around, you know, uh, didn't contextualize the points, didn't, you know, kind of give, like, flesh it out of like, what does it look like when, I don't know, when you don't have a belief or when you do have a belief, like, and the feral children part, is that, well, technically, not every human has this experience. So, he's missing a bunch of that stuff. Is he, chatability? Is he reasonability? I would say not so much. Like, it kind of, self-reinforcing circle of arguments being made, and that kind of, mental gymnastics being done, and then relatable to the general audience. He's trying. So he's if you come from the kind of like egalitarian standpoint of like, we're all in this human experience together trying to understand the universe, that's very relatable, right? And if he would have taken a stronger stance saying Christianity is the answer, the only answer, and nobody else is invited to the club, that's less relatable. Obviously, if it's preaching to the choir, literally or figuratively preaching to the choir, that if he was only talking to Christians, that would be more relatable. But he specifically trying to kind of proselytize, trying to get people on his side, that would be a much more difficult case to make. But when you come up from that angle of like, oh, the enigma of reality, and here's a book that, again, christening the Jew of like how I came around to Christianity. I wasn't, and now I am, and you can too. So I think, very intentionally relatable in that sense. Did he, steel man the counter arguments? No, there's serious plot holes that, like I pointed out multiple times. I mean, the closest attempt was, everybody, that he was making the claim that everybody has to believe because everybody has to believe. It's unavoidable. And so would I, recommend subscribing to this guy? No. You'll probably get dumber, listening to him for too long. It looks like he does apologetics, blah blah blah, probably a deconstruction of the Old Testament, New Testament, believing in Christ, Christianity, the meaning of life. No, like, you'll be missing a bunch of stuff listening to him. And at least in so I listened to this guy like a few weeks ago, just as a practice, and Alistair McGrath is 5,000 views. So going back to my list, that Alistair McGrath gets the categorization of a snake oil salesman. It's, pretty obvious that, we can't call him a journalist in any sense. Like, they're very like snippets of truth, and then like using it inconsistency or like incorrectly, that has to believe that kind of logic, and then somehow, so he initially separates of like, has to believe everyone's entitled to their opinions type thing, and then of course, kind of squeezing in, here's how I went from Marxism to Christianity and how it's been happy. And it's as strong of a claim that he was making within, at least in that video. And so from the perspective of someone who's like, oh, I'm lost, I'm struggling with life, I need to find fulfillment, I live in a first world where I don't have to worry about survival, and somehow hunting and reproduction isn't fulfilling, then you can easily kind of go down the rabbit hole of Christianity and how it's so-called fulfilling life. I have a fulfilling life by exercising belief, or to that extent. So let's see, Christian theologian. Oh, I can't even spell theologian. Yeah, that's probably the conclusion. So, all right, we gotta move on. Why we believe, blah blah blah. Okay, so the next one is Matt Iglesias. Why Iglesias? How do you pronounce that? Pronounce. I can't spell. Iglesias. It's spelled with an I. It's spelled with a Y? Hold up. Iglesias. Is it ever going to speak it? Well, that's not helpful at all.
Iglesias.
Oh, there it is.
Iglesias.
Iglesias. Okay, so the guy's name is Matt Iglesias. He's he doesn't have a YouTube channel. Grok identified him as a low popularity. One, because he doesn't have a channel, but just in the grand scale of things, Grok was also separating, like, hypothetically, if Joe Rogan didn't have his own channel, which he does, but if he didn't, he would still be in the high popularity category just because of how much, he does, like, how popular, how much, people know him. So, and then I picked one out.
I think there is a larger dynamic.
Oh, so this is a Coleman Hughes video. Coleman Hughes, I already subscribe. So we might, I don't know if he's going to come up at some point, but so he's interviewing Matthew Iglesias, and the topic is about left or right. Who is right? All right.
Between the right and the left, which is that, the left, controls a lot of institutions and has a lot of big ideas. Mm-hmm. Whatever you want to say about those ideas is a separate question. But the right, there's an abundance of criticism of institutions and big ideas on the left, and much of that criticism is valid. But it's less often that there is an equally big idea that offered as an alternative, or the same degree of successful institution building. And the newspaper example that you give is, I think, just one example of that dynamic that I think I'm seeing in a lot of different sectors.
Well, yeah, so we have this, polarization in the country, both in terms of parties disagreeing, but in terms of demographic groups, right? So, younger people, college graduates, people who live in cities, going to the left, and older people, working class people who live in rural areas, going to the right. And in the political domain, that's given Republicans an incredible advantage, because the Senate, and to an extent the Electoral College, give extra weight to those conservative leading demographic groups. So, Donald Trump can get elected.
Wait. Well, I'm going to go back 10 seconds.
And to an extent the Electoral College give extra weight to those conservative leading demographic.
So the Electoral College specifically is set up. If you guys don't know, American uh, general election politics, the dynamics is that it's not every vote. So we're talking general election at a national level. So, like for example, presidential, you know, elections. So when an individual is running at the presidential level, that it's not one vote in California is equal the same strength as a vote in, I don't know, Arkansas. There's they're weighted in the sense that, you know, there is a greater emphasis of, I might be missing flipping this in my head, but that the argument is, and this might be supporting his point, is that uh, the reasoning is that it's weighted unequally. Is that if it was just one vote and California is the same as Arkansas, that, you know, the candidates, you know, the politicians that are running for presidency would only go to the most populated areas, visit the most populated areas in order to convince, you know, the citizens to vote for them. So that, you know, rather than wasting your time in a lower population location, you know, a state that, you know, objectively has less people, the electoral college is set up so that it's more balanced, but so that, you know, it's, I forgot the exact like dynamics, but that's at least the thinking, so that it's at least intended to not inherently uh, lean towards one side or the other. So, you know, if you follow anything with American politics, roughly speaking, the more metropolitan urban areas are left leaning pretty much in every state. Not, you know, 100% in every state, but roughly speaking, you know, if you're just trying to simplify it, roughly speaking, metropolitan urban areas, capitals especially, are left leaning. And then if you go towards less metropolitan, less, you know, kind of dense populations, then it becomes, you know, obviously that's more rural and agricultural based and a lot more right leaning. So, you know, you can find this map of like, you know, pick any state, the capital is typically blue, and then the rest of the state is typically red, you know, on average for any given state. So, well, his claim was that. Well, let's listen.
Giving Republicans an incredible advantage because the Senate, and to an extent the Electoral College, give extra weight to those conservative leading demographic groups. So, you know,
kind of like it's giving some weight. Like if you go like Wyoming and Idaho and a few other states, like they still have very few what's the term, like electoral college like votes. So it's not like it's somehow completely balanced. Like California and New York still have a lot of whatever points or whatever it is. So at least it was intended to be balanced in that sense. So, well, we'll see what he says.
Donald Trump can get elected president while more people vote for Hillary Clinton. In 2018, Republicans do terribly, but they actually gain Senate seats because they're so strong in the rural areas. But so much stuff in life is done by working age college graduates. You know, like you're not going to build a media startup based on working class retired people. You know, it just doesn't, it's like nothing against them. It's just like, that's not who does things. It's not who runs institutions. And I think it's a pretty unhealthy place that the country's gotten in on both ends. I mean, I think progressive people feel their aspirations in democratic politics are being foiled through unfair means. And I think the conservative people feel that, look, you know, I just want to get medical advice from the American Medical Association. I don't want them to have a like heavily ideological, you know, guide to addressing inequities in medicine, right? That I just want institutions to function in their professional capacity, but they don't. I mean, institutions these days they tend to lean left in their management because that's who manages institutions. And it's creating a lot of distrust. It's creating a lot of dysfunction. It's creating a lot of frustration for both groups of people. But it's not obvious to me what we do about it.
So there's fluctuations with the kind of political ideologies over time. Roughly speaking, metropolitan areas much more left leaning, rural areas much more right leaning. It kind of ebbs and flows of what that actually means, of the values and whatnot. So that one, that the politics. So let's just say, for a chunk of time, Democrats, let's just say, are completely in charge. The president, Senate, House, and state, neighborhood, all, just if they, for whatever reason, it swings to the left for a moment, and then they don't have enough intelligence or a plan to actually maintain power. Same thing goes for the right. It's that whoever's in charge, broadly speaking, is actually too dumb to perpetuate the system that they've intended. That modern politics is more reactionary in the sense that each party is better set up as kind of an underdog, and that is trying to pick away at the perceived greater power. So if the left wing's in charge, the right's better set up for criticizing the left. But then if they actually gain power, they don't know what to do with it. They'll become corrupt by themselves. Same thing, so both sides do the same thing. So that if the right was in charge, the left is set up, again, this is just basic modern politics, of like petty politics, you could call it, of like the left is better set up as trying to criticize the right when the right's in charge. But then if they become in charge, they don't know how to hold on to it, that they make terrible policy. They, can't do a kind of positive feedback loop. It becomes a negative feedback loop. The more effort they do, that they lose popularity. And so right now, 2026, that we're on the, obviously Trump, took presidency for the second time, and the whole like building up to 2020, roughly speaking, was like the rise of left politics. And then now it's kind of waning. It's not completely, they haven't lost entirely all their power, but obviously the Trump administration is chipping away at left-wing policies, and they make their own fucking mistakes, but that it kind of it fluctuates, that it's kind of fluid, and the actual value system between left or right or whoever is changing all the time. Is that you find these videos of, like, let's say current hot topic in politics is immigration, and it's like, oh, deportation, the left wing saying, oh, deportation is bad, shouldn't do it at all. And then of course there's videos of Barack Obama saying, hey, we should deport illegal immigrants. So a position that left wing did or would have supported at the time, they are now disagreeing with, and saying, the left has swung so far to saying, well, there's no such thing as illegal immigrants. There's no, that it's not a crime. It's not a civil infraction, whatever. It's actually none of those things. Even though, even whatever, 10 years ago, they would have held a different position.
Yeah, it's not obvious to me either. It's just, it scares me that we are more and more entering a situation where everyone feels like a victim group and has legitimate grievances to point to, and sort of focus on. So as you pointed out.
So I was saying before in the previous episode, everybody thinks that they're the actual underdogs in the situation. So right now Trump's in charge. So there's people right wing, self-proclaimed right wing citizens, not necessarily the president or at the federal level, but just regular day-to-day citizens that are, self-proclaimed right wing, that would still say that left wing is actually like secretly in charge of everything. They run the institutions. They run Hollywood. They have all the money. That kind of stuff. And and then at least left wing now can legitimately say that, hey, the right wing guys are in charge. There's the president. Trump's in charge. What was that? There was the Hollywood thing where Paramount bought Netflix. Paramount bought Warner Brothers, something. So, there was this kind of petty politics dynamic of like, oh, look, the left's saying, look, rights, the right side, the right wing is the like true, power. We used to have power, now no longer anymore. Things are changing. But it's like, that's the kind of political philosophy dynamics, is that it's easier to kind of seem righteous, right? To be the underdog in every situation. Doesn't matter if you have power or not have power. You just continually say, we're fighting the good fight. We're fighting the bad guys. Here's this big scary monster, the opposition group. And, we will obviously, the intention is to overcome it and gain power. But, the funny part is that regardless of who's actually like president and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter. Everyone feels like they're the underdog because, it's kind of this like imperial, post-colonial sentiment, is that, before, let's say 40, right? Not 1950, that for the last however many thousands of years, being the top dog was the kind of aspiration and position, like ideologically, to have. But then since 1950, being the underdog is, the righteous position to have, because, you could say globalism and whatever shadow governments exist to bring down the political minorities. So, it's like, interesting enough, if you're boasting too much, it looks bad, and you have to have this kind of hero complex that you're saying, I'm fighting the good fight if I'm the underdog.
The left can genuinely point out the fact that my vote, in a very real sense, is worth less than the vote of someone in a rural region, a conservative in a rural region, and that violates my sense of justice and fairness. And then on the flip side, people on the right can point out the fact that, when they turn on the TV to anything other than Fox, or, try to just sample the mainstream media landscape, everything has a left-wing skew. And they can understandably feel like the culture is just totally captured by the left in some ways.
Well, and I also think that America has now a kind of, I don't want to exaggerate, but like a somewhat shared culture of valorizing victimization in a weird way. You're pretty young, but if you go back to, 20 years ago, I think that conservatives' critique of the left, or part of it, was that there was too much sort of emphasis on victimization and, oh, woe is me, and sort of, external locus of control, and people need to take responsibility for their lives and, do the best they can with what they have offered to them. And part of the Trump turn in Republican Party politics has been taking up that kind of same flag of like persecution and helplessness, but by different and wider groups of people, right? So now, like, it's immigrants' fault if I don't have the job that I want, right? Or like that, like trade is bad, and like the Chinese are pulling a fast one on us, and that kind of grievance politics, but coming from non-college educated white people in the Midwest, as opposed to low-income African American people, and it's, I think, like not super healthy. It doesn't it's true, right? Like none of us are like the authors of our own destiny, right? We are all beneficiaries and victims of circumstance to varying degrees. Things happen. You can't fully control anything in life, but it doesn't make people happier or better off to dwell on the ways in which they've been wronged, or it's something that happened to them that they can't control. Like giving advice to any human being, like you want to focus on the things that you can control, right? And like try to do your best. Like you will be better off that way. You will be happier that way. Trying to cultivate a sense of gratitude for what you do have,
Right. So there's a, he's making a good point, but to better contextualize it, left-wing has been focusing on the kind of victimization, and there's an entire, therapy speak and culture, the underdog, disabilities and mental, kind of dysphoria type language that has reinforced that they're, suffering and not doing well, and here's why. And it's a justification for politics, if it's used in that context. And on for the most part, the right wing, again, we talked about it before, but they kind of free market versus not free market, discussion, the spectrum. Obviously, right wing leans more towards free markets, and inherently requires, by its, nature of free market, requires a sense of responsibility, or, taking responsibility, even if it's not necessarily your responsibility, you accept it anyways, for the sake of, getting over it, to work towards something, to, if you're constantly dwelling on the past, that, you can't even enjoy the present. And if you're constantly trying to, again, the social justice is defined as distinct from simply justice. So there's social justice and just justice, simply justice. That social justice is a constant reflection, or a constant kind of analysis of the past. Saying, oh, I got, my group was wronged at this time through these events, and that's why, we're the underdogs. So, it's might not explicitly being the tool of the underdog isms, of like the underachieving, under whatever, might not explicitly being created as a tool for, this rhetorical political fight, but very implicitly, you created, in the left wing has created this kind of infrastructure of how they can justify, saying that they have the more righteous position, if saying, oh, look, I've got these disabilities, mental health, et cetera, and it's also caused by, the injustices from the past. That's why, I can't get over it, because, I'm still affected by it.
Sense of accountability for what's gone missing. And those are like really classic conservative ideas, but they've now just become across the board, I think, unfashionable in favor of everybody. Not even so much whining, but like being told by other people that like nothing is your fault. Everyone is out to get you. It seems like a good way to cultivate an audience, but it's just not great.
So what you're saying is the conservative idea of 30 years ago, the conservative critique of the left 30 years ago was true, but is now true of everyone.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I think it's gone pretty broad, and there's not a lot of, well, I mean, just like a concrete example of that happening, right? It used to be that, liberals would say, well, we could help people a lot if we had like better social programs to give them money and things like that. And I think that that's true. But then conservatives would say, but what's also true is that people who are raised by single parents face a lot of disadvantages in life that are not remediable wholly through the welfare state, and that people need to exercise more responsibility in their lives, and we should be supporting marriage and encouraging things like that. And that didn't really work. Like Bush era marriage promotion initiatives, like nothing came of that. And conservatives just kind of stopped talking about it at one point. But actually, all that happened was that the demographic spread of unpartnered parenting got bigger and bigger. And so now it's like, we just like have lost out on, I think, a valid conservative insight, because it would be impolitic now that you can't just sort of cast the irresponsible people as this like othered racial minority group, but these problems exist very much so in white communities, but conservatives don't want to talk about it anymore because it's not politically advantageous. Progressives don't want to talk about it because it was never the progressive view of these things. But we have like really serious problems, I think, in society that, require some level of like community engagement and concern over and above the things that the left wants to do.
It's also hard to imagine Trump being the face of the pro-marriage movement.
Well, yes, I mean, exactly. Right. I mean, he would not be a credible messenger for something like that. Or you could say, look, he's so supportive of marriage that he had 3. So you never know. But yeah, I mean, that's a kind of, it's a kind of decayed version of conservatism that Trump can represent.
Okay. I think I don't think that video was a great representation. I mean, he doesn't have his own channel, so it's hard to of deconstructing Matthew's position, or Matt's position. It, as far as I can tell, is kind of got this like very straightforward journalistic view and role. So hopefully another short video so I can make a proper kind of conclusion for this guy.
The pretty basic question for you about that. What's the difference between abundance and affordability?
I don't totally know what affordability. I mean, I don't want to sound like an idiot. I know what affordability is as a word, but it's caught on as a catchphrase, and as a literal-minded person, I sometimes wonder.
Oh, so this is a video from the capitalism. Capital isn't. So play on capitalism, and then capital isn't is not. 192 views. Now we're talking small. All right.
It's like, well, we can have inflation-adjusted median income, right? Is that what affordability is? I don't know. I think the idea of abundance was simply trying to reorient progressive-minded people in the United States back toward the idea that economic growth is actually, quite important, that distributional concerns matter, but they're not the only thing that matters out there. And then in particular, in a lot of fields of life where we are having problems like housing affordability, that we have a lot of regulatory induced scarcities that people need to look at there. Affordability, I think, is like a broader concept. You can make childcare more affordable with subsidies, at least for the people who get the subsidies, and that can be good.
So just to contextualize this, that affordability is a more common tool with the left-wing side. And, it's just saying that, for example, left-wing would focus on welfare programs and, distribution of tax money in order to make things affordable. Subsidize housing, subsidize cars, subsidize gas, subsidize whatever, just to make it affordable. And right-wing position, if you were taking like a more hard free market perspective, is affordability is not a meaningful, useful concept to use. Like affordability is subjective. It's not objective from the right-wing perspective, free market perspective. And that, if you've got the money, you define what is affordable or not. And from the left-wing perspective, that's more objective. It's like some like economic phenomena of unaffordability, like food deserts and all that kind of stuff. Like they're using it as a practically objective term.
If you have sort of valuable social goods there, it's also just, the voters elected Donald Trump on the basis of a promise to bring prices down, which I think people who know their macroeconomics understand was probably not a realistic promise, but it's a promise that he made, and now he's in political trouble over it, and it's just kind of fair game for his opponents to complain.
Can I try my distinction? I think that the
Yeah.
abundance, and it seems that you are going that direction. Abundance is mostly a focus about the total pie, basically ignoring distribution, while affordability is really an issue about distribution, maybe ignoring the total pie, but more an emphasis about the distribution. Because when you were saying the United States they did very well, I think there is no doubt that in growth of GDP per capita on average was really good. If you look at the distributional effect, I'm not so sure that they're really good. And if you look at quality of life for a lot of Europeans versus the majority of Europeans versus the majority of Americans, I'm not so sure the majority of Americans are better off because, unfortunately, in GDP, lawyers enter GDP, and we don't get much of utility, at least direct utility out of them. We get a lot of things that are not really in the utility that get into GDP. And we have distributional issue. There is a big chunk of the population in the United States that did not see an increase in real standard of living for decades. So I think that that's a problem in my view.
I think if we want to talk about growth and distribution, that's just a much.
So he was saying the growth in the guy was talking about the growth in salaries, wages. What was he saying?
Not really in the utility that get into GDP. And we have distributional issue. There is a big chunk of the population in the United States that did not see an increase in real standard of living for decades.
Okay, so the increase in standard of living. So that's not. So within the realm of macroeconomics, there is, these kind of metrics of trying to understand purchasing power and kind of, roughly speaking, affordability for average or, within certain economic strata of what the average person can afford, so that houses on average have gotten a lot more expensive. And obviously, like for most anybody, buying a house is one of the most financially expensive and risky kind of purchases they'll ever make, right? So there's this, housing affordability discussion where it really needs to be contextualized of its houses have gotten more expensive in ratio with salaries and wages. And that's, verifiably true. But the context is that houses now are much more expensive to build in the first place, so that you walk into a house that was built 200 years ago, it probably doesn't have, and this is in the American context, a centralized ducting HVAC system, and a furnace. It might be running on some other fuel source. A house from 200 years ago doesn't have anywhere the amount of electricity flowing through it as a contemporary house. There's so many other parts of a house now that's just inherently more expensive to build. So, it's not correct to say that the phrase houses are less affordable makes it sound like the house itself hasn't changed over time. And of course it has. It's like something that it from a macroeconomic perspective, it seems simple to just say, buying a house 200 years ago versus buying a house 50 years ago versus buying a house now should still be the same product, even though it's not.
So I think that that's a problem in my view.
I think if we want to talk about growth and distribution, that's just a much clearer conversation than a conversation about abundance and affordability.
And distribution, that's a very left-wing term. you know, if we're talking about like right-wing free market economics, distribution makes less sense as a concept, because it's not like the government is handing out all the resources. Like distribution is like, like a verb, like, that it is distributing, and making it sound from like a top down perspective. And in free market economics, it's not, there's nothing top down. It's just, person to person. So, try not to get like stuck in the kind of rhetorical tricks, in the kind of very quick linguistic changes that are being made.
And so that's maybe helpful. US versus Europe. I mean, I'm pretty sure at the median, the incomes in the United States are higher than in Europe, and that the gap is growing. I think that at the bottom end of the distribution is where we have the big problem in the United States. That this is a very harsh country to be a poor person in part for.
Okay. if it's very difficult for the poor person in America in the context of first world consumption standards, then yes. But, the poorest, the not the poorest, but the lower income, financial, income strata of the United States is still, like has access to, goods and services and resources that, let's say a third world, even like, middle class third world family wouldn't have access to. So again, that's trying to introduce like practical objectivity into something that's really subjective.
Income, health security reasons, also in part because public safety. Low-income Americans are subjected to quality of life issues that are much more severe than the ones that you have in Europe. These are big, important concerns. I mean, this is stuff that I've worried about my whole career. I do think, though, the housing conversation is a piece where sort of a pure distributional lens kind of runs out of gas, right? Because there's only, you have a musical chairs problem, with homes in New York or California, Washington, D.C., lots of other places. If there's only so many houses to go around, somebody is going to be left out. You can address that through a market, in which case it's poor people who are left out. You can address it with a social housing model, in which case it's people who lose the lottery who are left out. But like ultimately, you need to have more physical homes in the places where people want to live, or there's not going to be a possible fair way to distribute it.
So there is a like popularity issue within like economics where so popularity is not linear, it's exponential in the sense of like, the amount of money you make is again, so the kind of the y-axis would be money you make, and then x-axis is like popularity. So it's a exponential curve, not a line, where every incremental increase in popularity is entirely going to be concentrated towards the higher popularity areas. And so that's just the nature of like neighborhoods and cities and all that kind of stuff. So there is a kind of paradox of like, you can't make popular things affordable, because as soon as you make it, let's say you somehow like magic hand make something affordable, like rent control, and like, you took a neighborhood that was popular, you somehow bought everybody out or kicked everybody out, whatever, eminent domained it, and then converted it to affordable housing. It's no longer going to be popular because it was popular because there was a concentration of wealth. So, like the paradox is, somebody comes in, government comes in, says, I'm going to make this affordable. You took $1 million houses and turned them into $50,000 houses, right? You made it affordable. And then people then don't want to in the sense of practical living can then want to move there, but as if you took out the rich families and put them, they went somewhere else, that neighborhood then becomes affordable but no longer popular. So then they'll want to move towards the concentration of wealth. So in kind of like the interdynamics of like supply and demand and the concept of affordability, the buyer is the price is never low enough, right, for the buyer. And then from the seller's perspective, the price is never high enough, right? So there's this constant tension within that kind of free market of, yes, the buyer always wants to save money. They don't want to spend more money than they have to. Again, this is for like 99% of, all goods and services. They would like to have the service or a good as cheap as possible. And then the seller side was trying to make as much money as possible. So the concept of affordability kind of disintegrates in that context. But then if you try to introduce affordability somehow, that
So a last question from me. You've talked a lot about the importance of diagnosing the problem correctly. You've also been skeptical that there really is an affordability crisis, that it's just, as you said, basically anger at inflation. So then, even though Democrats, you wrote that you think Democrats should definitively talk obsessively about their ideas for promoting affordability, but aren't they perhaps just falling into the same trap that Trump fell into by misdiagnosing the problem and therefore hammering away at something that is actually not the problem and therefore will elude a solution?
I mean, it's a very tricky problem, right? I mean, because if, midterms are coming up, it's Congress, you can just say anything, no responsibility. But if you win an election in 2028, based on promising people that nominal prices will fall, you're going to be in the exact same problem that Trump was. Now, I think Luigi's suggestion that we should think about affordability as really just an economic distribution question is maybe more productive because Democrats do have a lot of ideas that would speak to that, right? I mean, there are proposals on the tax side and there's proposals on the spending side that could help at least people in the bottom half of the income distribution increase their level of material consumption, right? That's affordability, I guess, potentially in a good way, and that would be productive. But I think in a way, I mean, that's a very traditional Democratic Party agenda. If you go back, I mean, to Democrats before Joe Biden, right? Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Lyndon Johnson, Franklin Roosevelt, the thing that they all have in common is an idea that, well, we should have progressive taxation and we should have more government subsidization, particularly of social goods related to health and education. So, like, that's a great agenda. And if we can call that affordability and that connects with people, like, that would be amazing. I do think that people should be careful that they're not just promising a general fall in the price level, because abundance is not going to achieve that. Antitrust regulation is not going to achieve that. A catastrophic depression could achieve that, but that's not going to make people happier. And, this is unfortunately something that us in the journalism community have to try to explain to the public because it's not well understood.